Shout. Shout. All right, so good evening. Welcome to Austin on Rails, 10 years plus one, right? 10 years plus one. I'm going to go through my agenda here because I always forget I've only done this 20 times or something. And I get up here and I start rambling and I'll be off somewhere else and you guys are like, what the hell is this guy talking about? So if I stick to the agenda, things go better. So welcome, thank you for coming. My name is Anthony Lewis. You can call me Tony because you all know me. I don't owe any of you money, to the best of my knowledge. I work for this company called ShareThrough. We are hiring experienced Rails developer. If you know anyone or if you are someone, come talk to me. We're over at WeWork. We do native advertising, a lot of fun. I've been coming to these meetings for, I don't know, I talked about that last time. First off, anyone have any announcements, upcoming things? Nola is not here. Somebody talk about Austin RV. Anyone?
It's on Mondays, you should go.
It's on Mondays, you should go.
Yeah.
Right on. If Nola was here, she would give you more information. But it's on Mondays, you should go. I like that. What else is coming up? We're not having one of these meetings next month. There's this little thing they started doing in Austin called South by Southwest. Maybe you've heard of it. We're putting on a party during that.
Oh, you need to buy tickets to that.
A happy hour.
Yeah.
Don't buy tickets. If you paid money for a ticket, you have made a mistake. There is a way to get a ticket without paying for it. Anything you want to say about that? Tell us about it.
The answer is deeply embedded within the page.
Oh, come on. That's weak. That's weak. So the tickets are, if you don't find the code, the tickets are $25. If you DM me and send me $20 on PayPal, I'll give you the code. Say $5. $5 off right there. Just saying. That is the 14th of March. It's at
Our favorite place, Buffalo Billiards.
Buffalo Billiards. It is the South by Southwest web developer happy hour. We've got lots of great sponsors. They're all cool people, and they're going to buy you booze if you just go there. And I'll tweet out the link again. We've tweeted it out 100 times.
Share it out and invite your dev friends.
Yes, invite your dev friends. If there are people in town, for South by that are not normally here, invite them to come. We want them to come. That's what it's all about. Go to Austin RV. Go get your ticket for the web developer happy hour during South by. All right. So housekeeping. Restrooms. Go out there. Take a right, and they're over there somewhere. If you end up at the elevators, you went the wrong way. So here's how this meeting normally works. Normally we have a talk, and then we have a break, and then we have another talk. But tonight's lightning talks, which is amazing. We actually had 12 people sign up, and I would say at least half of those people are in this room right now. So that's amazing. So if you signed up to give a lightning talk, could you can we get a show of hands just out of curiosity? How many people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? 9? Did I count that right? So, okay, if you didn't sign up and you want to give a lightning talk, hey, we'll work something out. Maybe at the break you can come up here and tell me, and we'll get you up here.
Start working on slides.
Yeah, now's a good time to start working on your slides. Lightning talk, I don't even care if you have slides. I mean, I'm talking in front of a picture of stickers, and I'm doing fine, I think. So, I am kind of disappointed. I look around, and there are some female developers out here, and I don't know that any of them are giving a talk tonight. Holly signed up. She had to back out for something. Nola didn't come. She's not giving a talk this year. So, just saying, might have some time to work something in there if you want to. So yeah, we're gonna probably do like 5 or 6 talks. We'll take a break. Then we'll do a few more talks, and then we all go over to BD rallies for some socialization practice. So, I'm telling you, this thing's gonna fall. Be careful, this is sketchy. So let's see. One quick thing, you may have noticed there's pizza at the back, and you guys didn't pay for that. And also, when you go to BD Riley's, you're not gonna pay for that either. And that is thanks to this fantastic person back here in the corner from Hired. Have you guys heard of Hired? Yeah. They are awesome. Do you want to say a few words, or do you want to wait till the halfway point?
Whatever's easiest, I'm fine for that.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're welcome. You're doing all the sponsoring, so you can talk now and then if you want to, whatever. So we'll wait till the halfway point.
Okay.
All right. Very good. Very good. So let me see if I'm ready to do this. We are in co-working. So if you're going to do AirPlay, it's called co-working, I think. Maybe I'm right. So this is the blog post that is almost entirely up to date with the wiki page. Someone I didn't see, I don't see Nathan Ladd. Where's Nathan Ladd?
I don't know.
What the hell?
I saw him earlier. He said to be here.
Okay, all right. He's on the list.
He's later, so,
Yeah,
He's probably
his-
getting his slides put together.
That's, well, see, his original title was Linearization Basics, Modeling State as an Ordered Sequence of Transitions, which I was like, you're gonna cover that in 5 minutes? Then he updated the title to Tips to Save Your Bacon. So that's more like a 5-minute talk, I think. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, so looking at this, I see that the very first person on the list is none other than Mr. Keith Gaddis. I put him first on the list. You may remember he was not here last month, but he did make an appearance at the bar afterwards.
Crafty. That's where all the good shit happens. Next day. He said.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Keith, and we will let you do your thing.
Alright.
You good? Thank you, sir.
Co-working, you said?
Co-working. If you do classroom, it's going to really freak out the people over there.
Good evening. So it turns out the trick to getting me to show up for something is to schedule me early. Or at all. So this is the first talk I've given in probably 3 years, so bear with me. Like all my talks, it was prepared starting at 6 o'clock. So this one's down the rabbit hole, the story of a Pomodoro gone horribly wrong. And the story here is a little bit about me. I'm me. Twitter handle, Karma Junkie. Website, Karma Junkie. Email address is keith@karmajunkie. Just Google it, you'll find me. And I just do code stuff. I've been working in Rails for a long time. And the way this all started was like a Thursday afternoon. I needed to be working, and I was working on I have a startup called BidLily that we do recruitment software, and it's done in Rails. It's a legacy application. It's been around for several iterations of suck, and these days I'm kind of into Elixir and Phoenix. So looking at the legacy Rails code, I was like, I'm gonna play with this new API layer. I recently injected, I rolled out a production server that's a Phoenix just API server, and I was just doing that to collect some production metrics and figure out like how is this gonna actually perform, where are my headaches gonna be, stuff like that, so that when I actually start shipping real code in it, it's not going to like fall over on me. So I decided I'm going to start porting this to Phoenix, and of course one thing you immediately realize once you've gotten through all these kind of minor production rollout headaches is that you need to get into your database. Thing is about me, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to stuff like this, and typing out a bunch of active record models into ecto schemas seemed like not a good use of my time. And just so you understand what I'm talking about, who else heard of Elixir and Phoenix in here? Who hasn't heard of it? Never heard of it before. Okay, so it's cool. Check it out. I'm not going to go on a soapbox about it. Nobody clap or anything. So here's an example of an active record model. I just yanked this out of my legacy code. There's nothing special about it. Ignore the batch touchable. It's not as insidious as it sounds. It's just got, an assortment of associations and a, method that I left in there that is just kind of a predicate method. Anyway, so here's an equivalent model or schema in Phoenix, well, rather in Ecto, which is the analog for active record in that ecosystem. Fairly similar. One thing you'll notice though is that we actually enumerate all the fields, field by field, which is another thing I didn't feel like doing by hand and like dumping my database and typing in all those things. Even with regular expression finder replace, it's still kind of a pain in the ass. So like all good coders, I decided let's write a script for this. I don't know why, but I usually start with a spike script on something like this, just some trash file in a directory that I start hacking in. For whatever reason, rake felt like the way to go this day. You can't read this. I'm not sure if you can actually even see the coloration here, but what started off as like a Pomodoro's worth of coding was down here, but by the time I got done, and 2 days later, like this is everything that I had. And I wish you could see it better, but this markdown presentation software, because I'm too lazy to learn PowerPoint, doesn't scale that code very well. I'm not sure how you would, but anyway. So I've snipped out a few excerpts. So this is like kind of the actual task itself. And I'm gonna throw all this stuff up on a GitHub gist if anybody's interested. One thing I wanna say is that I'm really not proud of this code. It's some of the worst code I've written in the last few years. I don't recommend anything about this, writing code. I don't really even recommend using this task. But the nuts and bolts of this comes down to like, all right, so this code loads up the active record models, goes through the associations, throws them into a little wrapper object that I use to spit out more stuff in this piece of code, which is just a ERB template. The idea being to like get me like 80% of the way there. It was a fun little excursion into the innards of active record. Not all that recommended, but it worked. Stuff you should know about this. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and show you like how it actually works before I go into the other stuff to know, because I feel like that's more interesting. So the way you call it is, like I said, it's a rake task, right? So the namespace is ex, which is a common Elixir file ending ex export, and the module name is. So I just kind of threw together a bare bones, like just mix new or mix phoenix.new, which is kind of the equivalent of like Rails new. Anyway, that just naked project, and compiled it. And the namespace, anyway, that app name is extricate Phoenix. So you give it the module name and the output directory. In this case, I've indicated to overwrite files that are already there. You run it. I'm gonna run for a minute. I hope. Yeah. So all this crap at the bottom is stuff that these are all the models that it actually exported. And then you get down here and this is the stuff that is actually not an active record model. Some of it is probably stuff that it just blew up on. Like I said, this is not high quality code. But if we jump over to the Phoenix app, what we can see is if you do just like a basic, so I picked the event model. Now, the module that I gave to the rake task, put everything in extricate Phoenix. So to use the ecto schema, we do extricate phx.event. This is how you would use like a where or something like that in Phoenix, and then hand it off to the repo and grab me the first one that comes out, and we get this. The text in yellow is kind of the representation in IEX, which is like IRB. So it works. I proved it. Nobody called me a liar. So stuff you ought to know about this is, like I said, this code is really bad. Like it's worth a presentation or a series of blog articles on unscrewing this pooch. It's so bad, like just beyond bad. This is what happens when you start off writing something that you think is going to take like 5 minutes, and it's just like, oh man, this one little thing I ran into, let me just write 5 more lines, and then, well, I can extract a class out of this. And before you know it, you're like 18 pages deep and wishing that you had done anything else with your afternoon. Like, literally anything else. Cleaning your son's room seemed like a better idea than what you said this time. There's tons of stuff to do to it. I probably will still play with it some. I think I'm gonna roll it up into a gem, clean it up, turn it into like an actual executable file. There's some other cool stuff you could theoretically do. Like, one thing it doesn't do is handle polymorphic associations. And so one thing you should know is that you probably shouldn't use polymorphic associations. And you're gonna do it because, or at least if you're me, because you're lazy, and that's easier than rolling 2 or 3 tables that you need to not use polymorphic associations. So what I'd like to do is actually have it fix that problem for you, give you some migrations that actually fix that, which would be nice if they included that in Rails, because it's actually possible. And I think this slide has got more text on there that doesn't show up. Yeah, so there's other stuff like that I'll probably do to roll it up into a gem, let people use it. But philosophically, I think there's kind of a problem here, in that you're just like carrying baggage over from one place to another, and things that are a good idea in Rails are not necessarily a good idea in a different environment. I mean, Elixir is a functional language. It has some very different patterns and very different capabilities, different strong suits. So just because it was a good idea in Rails, even if things were a good idea in Rails, doing it that way in something else is not necessarily a good idea. So I don't philosophically recommend doing this kind of thing. But again, I'm lazy and I wanted to, use my project. So anyway, that's it. That's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, if you haven't checked out Elixir and Phoenix, you probably should. I shouldn't say that at Austin on Rails, but it's pretty cool. From what I've heard, it's like super fast. Where was that? Lone Star. Yeah, Lone Star. Guy gave a talk and it was ridiculous. Hey, look at that. Well done, sir. Well done. Caleb is going to tell us about the ancient hacker's diet. I like it.
Can y'all hear me back there?
You really need the microphone.
We'll use the microphone.
Use the microphone because you're on television too.
I'm on television. I didn't know I was on television.
Actually, you're on YouTube. Which might as well be
So there's an old Wall Street tale. A newcomer asks an old timer, how do you make money on the market? The wise man answers, nothing could be simpler. Buy low, sell high. The beginner asks, how can I learn to do that? The sage responds, that takes a lifetime. Simple doesn't mean easy. We're going to talk about the hacker's diet, how to lose weight and hair through stress and poor nutrition. So John Walker, the author, is a software engineer who decided one day to approach his weight as an engineering problem. But before we get into that, I'm Caleb Thompson. I work at ThoughtBot, and I organize Keep Review Weird. Your body has inputs and outputs. The difference between the two dictates your weight loss or gain. There are no miracles. The only way to lose weight is to burn more calories than you eat. So the most interesting thing I think that Walker has to say, he's talking about his trend line. So I just tweeted this out, and also if you're fast, then you can copy it down here. This is a screenshot from the webpage, but you can see my actual trend line at that link. So the trend line is an exponentially smooth moving average of your weight. And it's used to compute your daily average daily calorie balance. So what that means is that we have here some statistics. You can see that I'm losing 1.2 pounds per week, and that means that I'm burning 593 calories per day on average. Now what that is important for is telling me that no matter what I'm doing, how many calories I'm eating, how much food I'm eating, I know that I'm burning, on average, about 600 more calories than I consume, which lets me do something called negative reinforcement. So if my weight isn't what I want it to be, then I can adjust that down. So 500 is about 1 pound per week, because 5 times 7 is 3,500, and that's a pound. 3,500 calories is a pound of fat. So if things aren't how I want them, then I can adjust the number of calories I'm eating up and down, or I can adjust what I'm doing, whatever. So the idea behind the trend line is that you track your weight constantly, but don't ever look at your day-to-day weight. You only ever look at this running average. So that's contrary to the information or to the advice that, say, Weight Watchers or a lot of diet specialists will tell you, because they want you to look at it once a week or look at the averages. The average is okay. Once a week suffers from the same problem as looking at it day to day, and it's all a psychological problem. And so what this trend line does is cancels out things like water weight differences, like, oh, I forgot to eat last night, or I drank a bunch of water and then got drunk and whatever. So what you do is you weigh yourself first thing in the morning naked to get your best results. And doing it at that same time of day lets you make sure that you're getting sort of the same bit of information each day. So what this is an exponentially smooth, weighted moving average, which means that the previous day matters much less in determining your true weight, as he calls it, such that after about 20 days, previous weights don't even matter. The trend weight lags your scale weight by a few days, but it solves that same psychological problem we were talking about, where looking at daily weights can make you feel bad about suddenly losing or suddenly gaining. So if you look at this line, it's hard to show in this graph, but if you're looking at this line, then you can see, oh, it's always going down. But looking day to day, it's like, oh shit, why am I going up? Oh, I'm still up. Oh, suddenly down, awesome, cool, I did something right. Down again, oh shit, what did I do this time? But all the time, you're almost always moving down. There's only this one day in this whole chart where you've actually gained any weight, and it was a small amount. So Walker includes some spreadsheet for use in Excel, but it's the 2003 version of Excel, and they don't even work anymore if you've got an updated version. So for the modern techie, you can use a couple of free apps. The first is TrendWeight, which is the screenshot that you see in the background, and that pulls from either Fitbit or Withings. I don't know about the Withings app, but I know that the Fitbit app is free to use, and so you can plug in your scale weight into that, and TrendWeight will pull that down after you connect. So another thing that Walker talks about is calorie counting, and nobody wants to do this. It's awful. He's got a lot of good reasons to do it. I'll let him defend those if you decide to read the book. I counted for a few weeks to get a handle on how hungry I ought to be when I have the deficit going that I should have, and then stopped counting. And using sort of that feeling, I've been able to continue to see basically the same change no matter what. So I can sort of tell how hungry I ought to be when I have a 500 calorie deficit. Walker would like you to measure and plan everything you eat. And you can eat whatever you want. You can eat fats, you can eat carbs, whatever, so long as you're managing the calories correctly. Now I did this for a bit, but like I said, it didn't really, like nobody wants to measure calories. I couldn't do that long term. So when I was doing it though, I was using the MyFitnessPal, I think that might have actually been made here in town, and the Fitbit app. Both of them have great calorie databases for tracking sort of what you're eating. And you can sort of guess as when you go out to a restaurant or something, you can sort of guess by throwing in some of the ingredients. So like I said, I figured out what the deficit I was going for felt like, and I'm able to stick with that without counting. Your mileage may vary. Walker's third major point is that you should exercise for the sake of you shouldn't exercise for the sake of losing weight, but to live longer. Don't kid yourself into thinking that exercise by itself will make you lose weight. Consider these activities and the number of calories that an average person burns per hour while performing them. Compare those numbers to remembering that they're for a full hour spent to these food items that you're probably eating just about every day.
About 20 minutes ago.
So exercise to live longer, not to feel better, and not to lose weight. To feel better and live longer, not to lose weight. Walker does provide a workout plan. It's about a 15-minute a day, low stress, a few activities you can do at home or in a hotel room, in the bathroom, whatever. You don't even have to tell anybody you're doing them. I like to run and go to the bouldering gym instead, because that's more fun. You can find his book where he talks for a lot longer than I have. Here on the internet, it looks like a creepy website that hasn't been updated since 1998. It basically hasn't. And another great resource is The Healthy Programmer by Joe Cutner. That's all I've got.
Very nice. Yeah, makes me feel better. All right, so are you next?
I think so. Jesse?
You are Jesse.
All right.
Welcome.
What's the name of this screen?
Co-working. It's totally here you go.
All right, so today was the target release date for Rails 5.0. The first beta came out in December, second beta came out at the beginning of this month, and over the last couple of weeks, oh, my slides are advancing without me. All right.
Faster.
Right, so over the last couple of weeks, I downloaded Rails 5 and gave it a shot, trying to put together a little project, and so I've got 5 things about Rails 5.0 to talk to you guys about tonight. So number 1 is Rails 5 supports a minimum Ruby version of 2.2.2. Yay, this is great. Or maybe it's not if you haven't, you've got some crazy old version of Ruby that you have to upgrade. Number two, check your favorite gem. Here are some gems. And holograms as well, yes. So for example, Devise, which is a pretty popular gem, doesn't support Rails 5.0 yet. The latest release candidate does, but if you're using gems that are less frequently updated, maintainers may not have started porting those to Rails 5 yet. Number 3, they've added a new class to the Rails framework that's analogous to the application controller. They call it application record, and it inherits from active record base, and the idea is to inherit your models from that class and put stuff that you might have previously monkey patched into, for example, active record base into the application record class instead of monkey patching. Simple enough, you can add that to an existing project before you migrate to Rails 5. Check your before callbacks on your models. So one change that they've made in Rails 5 is the API for the before callbacks. currently, if one of those callbacks returns a false value, it cancels your transaction and subsequent callbacks. They've changed that to explicitly require an exception being thrown to halt the transaction chain, which is a really nice change. I don't know how many people intentionally use that feature versus accidentally use that feature. I suspect it's mostly accidentally used. Before migrating, you should check your models if you use before callbacks. This is a great case for a unit test, where you can check to make sure that your callback does or does not do the right thing when you save the model, and if you upgrade to Rails 5 and it's no longer behaving as expected, it'll fail. And finally, they've introduced a new API mode for Rails JSON API for applications that don't need to render views. They've provided some sort of recommendations or quasi-requirements for how your API should be structured, and you can start moving your APIs over to be consistent with that before you upgrade to Rails 5, or you can start learning them if you're looking at building a new application in Rails 5. There are a handful of good blog posts out there about it. This one is on the CodeShip blog, and they're pretty easy to find if you search for JSON::API. And that's 5 things. I guess I should introduce myself at the end of the talk. I'm Jesse Kipp. I work at RigUp. We're a startup company here in town, and we use Ruby on Rails to build our application, as I'm sure you're surprised about. Yes?
For JSON API, I'd like to recommend the JSON API resources gem. We're using it, and it's great because it follows the spec exactly and gives you nice error documents if you screw up on sending bad data.
Awesome. The comment was to use the JSON API resources gem because it provides a lot of great features.
Error checking.
Error checking, yes, in particular. And that is all I have.
Man, this is awesome. Look at this crowd. How many people are in here? We should count off. But we won't. Ever do that? Count off?
Sure.
First person says 1, call around.
Hey, it worked.
Of course it works.
It's Apple, of course it worked. Follow up, I've got a couple projects on Rails 5 and it's awesome, so if you guys haven't checked it out, definitely do so. But I'm not going to talk about Rails 5, I'm going to talk about Middleman, and specifically doing kind of like Railsy services with Middleman and CloudFront. So I'm Nathaniel Jones, I'm a Ruby on Rails developer here in town. And let's get started. So what is a middleman?
Oh no, it doesn't just work.
No, it didn't. Let's see here. Co-working. And play. Hey, there we go. All right. What is a middleman? So a middleman is a static site generator. It's a Ruby gem that generates static sites, and it gives you a lot of the benefits that you're used to building out front ends with Rails. So I guess the first question we might want to ask is why am I concerned about extracting stuff from my Rails app into a static site, right? Like, why am I even considering this, right? So there's a lot of upsides to serving static files. First one, of course, is security. You don't have any moving parts. There's nothing for people to try to throw SQL injections at, no servers to update. It's just like static HTML and CSS, you're good to go. Another one of those is speed. Serving static files is much faster than serving dynamic views from your Rails app. Speed is also super important for search engine optimization. So an example of where I would actually use middleman is to extract a lot of like the marketing material. So about page, home page, terms of use, like all of that stuff I'll take out of my Rails app instead of like rendering it through my controllers and put it into middleman. And then they're loading super fast, and I've kind of got that load off of my Rails app. And then of course there's stability, right? So there's a couple of upsides on the stability side. There's nothing to crash, no databases to go down. One of the other benefits is that if you do bring down your Rails app, your marketing site stays online or your status site stays online. So it's a little bit less of a hiccup or a glitch. All right, so we kind of see the upsides of extracting some of our static files out of our Rails app and into middleman. But what are some of the cons, or maybe the concerns, right? So I know for me, when I'm gonna build out a static site, I'm like, oh, but I should just use Rails because I want HAML, and I want SCSS, and I want CoffeeScript, and I want like it to all be compressed into nice little files that load a lot faster. And so I guess I'll just like generate a Rails app and spool up a Heroku dyno, and I know I can do it and it'll be really fast, but then I still have all of the complexity of the moving parts. Or maybe another one is I need a blog, right? Or my marketing team needs a blog, so I guess I have to use WordPress. And middleman actually nicely solves all of those. So they're actually pulling in sprockets, which is the same asset pipeline that Rails is using. And they are, so you have access to HAML, SCSS, CoffeeScript, Slim, all of the front-end technologies that you're used to using with Rails, you can also use with middleman. Middleman will render all of your files out into static compiled HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files that any browser can download. And so you have all of the development productivity, the developer productivity, and then but static files on the other end. Middleman also has a blogging extension, I guess you would call it, and you can just go ahead and generate or create markdown files, and it'll pull in all of the markdown files and generate the static HTML. It'll generate pages, pagination. It'll even let you do like categories and tags if you fiddle with it a little bit. I've got an example repo at the end that kind of has it all configured and jiggered up, and you guys can take a look if you like. All right, so what about deployment? So I like to deploy my middleman apps directly to S3. S3's come a long way in the past few years. They actually support website hosting now. And so generally how I'll do it is I'll have a GitHub repo just for my middleman project. And then I'll tie it into Circle CI, which is a continuous integration server. And for our purposes here, that's basically going to be free. And a couple of lines of configuration, and Circle will listen for you to push new files to GitHub. You don't have to compile them beforehand. You just push your source files, your HAML, your SCSS, all that good stuff to GitHub. GitHub sends it on to Circle. Circle builds your site, pushes it up to S3, and then 3-4 minutes later, if you want, you get a ping in Slack, and your site is up. Now, say you did something wrong, right? Like you fat fingered, your HAML and something's indented or whatever, then your build is going to fail, and Circle is not going to deploy your broken site. So for like all intents and purposes, it's kind of like impossible to break your static site, no matter who has access to the repo, which is a super nice feature. All right, so one of the things that comes up though is now my Rails app is on an ugly subdomain, right? So I've got my static middleman site, and that is at example.com. So now I have to host my Rails app on like go.example.com or app.example.com. I can do that. Lots of people do that. There's nothing really wrong with it, but it's not quite as clean as just having everything on example.com. Or in the case of some projects, take TicketBud, we need like event listing searches on the actual root domain, so we can't just you can't just put the app on the subdomain. So there's a couple different ways to solve that, but if you're looking for just a quick way to do it with your hobby project, you can actually spool up an AWS CloudFront instance, and they've got this cool new thing called behaviors. I say new, it's probably been around for a while, but I found it a few months ago. And so behaviors, so first you define a couple of origins over in this tab, and an origin is going to be like your S3 bucket, or here I've got a load balancer that's pointing at the Rails app. So I've got a couple of those, and then I define these behaviors. And so I say everything in the /store like path goes to the load balancer, the Rails app. Everything in /assets, that's from the Rails asset pipeline, that goes to the load balancer. Everything else just kind of like fall through onto the S3 bucket, the static website. So if I go to example.com, I pull up my static site. If I go to my dynamic Rails app, CloudFront is smart enough to load up my Rails app, and it all just kind of works. You can also do SSL termination here. You can redirect HTTP to HTTPS. It's pretty slick. So that's half of it. And then of course the other half is, well, now my development environment is like super fragmented, right? Because I've got middleman apps or middleman server running, and I've got my Rails server running. They're all on different ports. This is all pretty nasty. It is pretty nasty. I was able to jigger up some stuff. It wasn't too painful using these different technologies. And so you'll see here for my wife's site, I actually have SSL and a .dev domain, and I can click around and work with it exactly as like it is in production. And there's a link to that at the end of the talk. And so it's also not just for marketing sites. You can also use it for your single page application. So this is one that I built out a while ago that's on top of Middleman, and it's talking with the API. It's all Ajax and JavaScript and that good stuff. But it is compiling to the single page application to a static and then hosted on S3 or however you want to host your static files. So yeah, thank you.
Well done. Very nice. You guys are doing a fantastic job, by the way. Just gotta say that. Time is like perfect. Why am I even timing people? It's freaking great. So, you are Max?
I am Max.
Max is going to teach you guys some Vim tricks, right?
Yes.
He's not going to teach me anything. I know all the tricks. All of them. :Q. That's the one.
It's the only one that matters.
That's all you need. Co-working. Or cow-working. There should be. Oh no, not there.
Oh, on the, yeah.
Yeah. So give it, yeah, there you go. There you go. We got it. You're on the right one there. Maybe display preferences, there you go. Yep. No, co-working, there you go. Did we do it? Success. Yes. Nicely done. All right, welcome.
Okay. So last time I gave a talk here, I put a bunch of colors in there, if any of you guys remember, and I just made a mess out of myself because I'm colorblind, so today it's just black and white. So who uses Vim here, or has ever used Vim? Yes! Awesome. Well, this talk is for you. The slides will be tweeted out. This is my Twitter handle. You can follow me there. So don't worry about like writing any of this stuff down. Let's go right into it. The first thing is the very easy, very simple, but there are some people that don't know it, and it's the shift plus A, just capital A, and it goes to the end of line A, and goes directly into insert mode, which is kind of nice. So for instance, you have a quotes controller and you have your cursor on line 5, just shift A and go to end of the line. Very simple. Now, if you want to go to the beginning of the line, just do shift I, which is the same thing. Very cool, very basic. Everything is good. Next thing is the relative number line, which is kind of cool. And basically what it does is that it enables you to go from this setup to this, and you can see that the lines depend on where your cursor is currently at, and you can also get like the actual absolute line on the actual cursor. And this is going to be helpful in a little bit. You'll see why. Next up is the control dot command, which it's not control actually, it's just dot. Whoops. Yeah. So that it's also really helpful. I'm gonna show you now how everything works together. So take for example, I work at Beak, which is a startup that is like Facebook for books. And so we have a lot of books, and this is our books controller. And you can see that you have a create action, and if you look correctly, you can see that there's a little problem here. We are missing some commas. So we're gonna try to fix that in less than 10 keystrokes. Let's see if we can do it. First thing is we can move that. We have to move down from the first line to the 13th line, and we can do that with 13J. And this is very helpful if you have if you have numbers, relative numbers enabled. This is very helpful. You can just see which line you want to move to and do 13J. And like right now, it's not as useful because I'm on the first line. You can just see. But if you were like in between and you wanted to move to some other line, you could you would have to like do math and say like, okay, how many lines do I have to move to the next one? So this is actually pretty useful. So we move down here. Then we use the shift A that we learned in the first lesson and move to the end of the line, add the comma, escape to go back to normal mode, then go down, click dot to do the last command you did, which was to enter the line, the comma at the end of the line. So it does that automatically, down and enter, and it's done. It's pretty simple, pretty cool. Yes. Okay. Moving on, this is another cool command that I found about recently, which is pretty nice. It joins the lines together without going into any insert mode. So for instance, you have this, and you can press capital J a couple times, and you end up with something like this, which is very useful to like compress lines together, and when you're like refactoring stuff or changing stuff, it's pretty nice. Then there's this command that I've never used before, but it actually works. You can do GX when you're on top of any URL, and it will actually open a browser, and it's actually pretty nice. I've never used it, like I said, but I found that if I'm ever browsing like a log file or something like that, I could just do GX to try going to that site and see what that's all about. Next up is the abbreviation command, which is very useful to abbreviate stuff, or long stuff, but it's most useful when you're actually trying to prevent stuff that you always mistype. So for example, you can add this in your vim.rc, which is the configuration file for your Vim. You can just, if you write funsiton all the time for some reason, you can change it so that Vim actually corrects you and you don't have to be typing the same thing all over again. It's actually nice, but let's level up, right? So we're gonna use a plugin for this. It's called Vim Abolish by T-Pope. And this, what it does is that it does a search. You can see that normally you would use a lowercase s for the search. And in this case, it gives you the capital S search. And what it does an insensitive search. Like it'll change lowercase, uppercase, and camel case, but it'll preserve the actual casing of the letter. So this is how it actually looks like. Take for instance, I have a quotes controller for my books, and I want to change this to phrase because I don't like quotes anymore for some reason. So I can just type this command over here and change quote to phrase, and bam. So it's actually pretty cool. You can see that the phrases on top, the phrase model, phrase at phrase, everything is phrases. It's good. It's actually pretty cool. The next one is the argument list, which is helpful to create a list of arguments. Yay. So this is how it works. You actually type args and then type all the paths to each of the files you want to add to your argument list. And then you combine that. So you can also do something like this, where you like just run a shell command inside of this, and this will add all Ruby files that are within like the app folder. So you load this up and then do this, which is argdo, which executes one command on every buffer. So usually in other editors like Sublime, you can do like Command Shift F, I think, and it'll try to like find and replace all over. But this is actually how you do it in Vim. So you could do, like, for example, for the last one, I could set the file type to Ruby so that it actually loads the Ruby syntax and not some other stuff. Let's do it all together now. We're gonna do the same thing that we did before. We're gonna start with by loading all the RB files on the app, and then we're gonna argdo on each of the buffers. We're gonna replace the quote with phrase. And I actually did this for a Beak for our project, and this is how it actually looked like, or my diff. It just changes a lot of things. Of course, I have to change like the names of the files later on, but that's like another thing. And you can actually see a little good diff of everything. I mean, it's really awesome. Like pinned phrases, just everything works. It's kind of cool. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I got. Thank you.
Totally lied before. I learned something. So, yeah, there's lots of chairs over here. You guys that are standing in the back, please have a seat. Good grief. No one should have to stand for the whole time. All right, so we've got one more talk. This is Scott. You told me you were Scott.
I'm also wearing a name tag.
You're wearing a name tag. That's awesome, dude. I need to get one of those. So this is Scott. He's gonna give his talk, and then we're gonna take a little break, okay? And then we've got some more talks after the break. So looking forward to it. You down with co-working? Co-working. There you go. All about it.
Oh, perfect. You put all that shit on that side.
It always does that.
Huh.
You need to show you how to fix that.
No.
You can do that too. That also works.
Yeah. I'm gonna go slow.
It's fine.
All right.
Good.
Cool.
How you guys doing? So, yeah, I've been at a conference all day. That's why I'm wearing the name tag and the tie. I don't dress like this every day, I swear. Right? So my name is Scott. I work at Own Local, which is here in Capital Factory. We're an online advertising company, and shocker, we are hiring. So if that's your fancy, then let's talk. But anyway, so tonight I'm going to talk about, my talk is titled RTFM. So, start out with a quick story. When I was going through my software engineering internship, I was getting ready to work on my first pair programming exercise with our director of engineering. And we sit down and we were going to parse some XML using the Nokogiri gem. I was super excited, so excited that I didn't prepare anything for it. I just showed up that morning and was like, all right, cool, I'm ready to go. So we sit down and I'm driving, but I have no idea what I'm doing. He's pretty much telling me what to do the whole time. And I've got a little Google Doc open that's pulling, that I'm adding all these Nokogiri methods to that I have no idea what to do. The CSS, the search, all those cool things. And so I'm asking him as I'm going along. I'm like, hey man, how do you know this? He's just pulling it out of thin air. And so after about the fourth or fifth method that I've added to my list of things I need to go home and Google, he says, hey Scott, why don't you, there's one more thing you need to add. It's RTFM. And without thinking, I'm like, oh, what is that, another gem I need to look at? And he goes, no, it stands for read the fucking manual. I was like, all right, well, that was my little ass kicker for the day. So I went home and I was like, I am not going to come out, I'm not going to show my face in the light of day until I have read through the Nokogiri documentation and I know everything that there is to know about Nokogiri. So, and at this point, I don't know anything about this stuff. So oops, wrong way. So I pull up the Nokogiri docs, or I try to. Like I'm feeling right now. There we go. So, and here it goes. So I look through the description. I'm like, oh, XML is like violence. If it doesn't solve your problems, you're not using enough of it. I'm like, all right, cool. I can get down with this, right? But I get down and I start clicking around. I start looking at the I start looking at these different classes, the HTML, the XML. I don't know what's going on here at all. I'm new. I've never looked at this kind of stuff before. I came from WordPress land where you have this nice WordPress codex with really user-centric language, and it's really descriptive and really thorough. And I'm looking at this. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. This is really foreign to me. So I gave up that day. I'm not gonna lie. So a few weeks go by, and I realize, if this is something that I want to do long term, I need to figure out how this stuff works. And specifically for this, it's the YARDoc type of documentation, which tends to be pretty concise. It's really dependent on how descriptive engineers choose to write comments or choose not to. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a really quick example of a couple of methods that helped me get from a point where I was looking at the source code, reading the comments through the source code directly, and relating that back to YARDoc so it makes a little bit more sense. Does that make sense? No? Cool. All right. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to pop into IRB, and I'm going to require Nokogiri, and open URI. So this is a pretty entry-level talk, by the way. If this is remedial for any of you guys, I apologize. But basically, what we're actually going to do is, if I go back to home, I'm going to use a little bit of the, I'm going to steal a little bit from this synopsis bit right here. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to create this doc variable, and it's using OpenURI to open the Nokogiri tutorials installing Nokogiri page. Easy cheesy, right? There it is, Nokogiri, the doc variable is set. And so from here, I'm like, all right, well, I've got this HTML page. I can do some basic stuff with it, right? So the first thing that I do is I look to see, well, what class does this belong to? So this is one of the Ruby introspection methods. It gives you the ability to see, what type of object specifically that you're dealing with. So I'm looking at a document object within HTML. So I go into this and here, and boom, HTML document. Well, I see all these constants that are inherited. It's all just capital letters, right? I don't know what that means. You've got some class methods, some instance methods, right on. So as a newbie, I'm not really picking up on any of this. What worked really, really well for me was calling the .methods method, which gives me all of the methods that specific variable has access to. So, and those are native methods. Those are methods that are inherited within other classes of the Nokogiri gem. Those are methods that are inherited from other things that I have included, which I don't in this session. But basically, this was a really, really great way for me as a beginner to see what I have access to for a given variable. So one of the methods that I see in the document is the title method. Well, this example is kind of contrived because we can all guess what that might do, hypothetically speaking. It might actually give us the title of the document. That's crazy, right? So, but so let's say that's, you know, it's something that's complex, and like, oh, I don't know what that's doing. So the easy way to go about this, for me, when I was learning how to use this, when I was learning how to use this gem, was to give it, use the method to send the title method into it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So method, oops. Typing with one hand is a little challenging. So what this guy's going to do, it's going to give me a method object. And what I can do with this method object, I can do a couple of different things, but the most important thing that I would do in this situation was I would call the source location on this. And the source location method, sorry guys, bear with me. Thank you. And so what this returns is, it actually shows me exactly where this method is in the code. So it's an array that returns two elements, the document and then the actual line of code. So what I would do is I would go to the actual GitHub page, which I'm gonna move over here, and I went through and I would actually go find that line of code and I would read through it. And what was actually really, really nice about this is Nokogiri is a great example because it's actually pretty well documented, as I came to realize the more and more that I read through it. But documents and then lines 16, and so, how about that? Yeah, that's pretty cool, right? So it shows you exactly what it's doing. And again, like I said, this is a really simple example, but basically going about it this way helped me, somebody who was coming from a very descriptive, very thorough documentation standpoint, moving towards like Yardoc, where things are a little bit more concise. I guess that's the best word for that. Not, you know, you're not getting the kind of user-centric language that you're getting in languages or tools that are, I guess, developed more for the general public and not like hardcore back-end programming. So what's like, again, great about Nokogiri is it's really well documented, and reading through the source code was a fantastic way of figuring out how this works. And then actually seeing the comments, going back through the Yardoc, it really helped me figure out how exactly things are organized in Yardoc. So you only have to suffer through this once. Once you've done this exercise once, maybe twice, it really helps get you comfortable with the Yardoc type of notation. Does that make sense? Awesome. All right, that's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Very well done. I'm amazed. So far, everyone that's signed up to give a talk has been here and they've actually given a talk. And that's awesome. So we are going to take a short break. But before we do, I got to ask, who in here is looking for a job as a Rails developer?
And their employer isn't in the room.
And your employer is not in the room. Okay, so how many, show of hands. One, you don't count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 7. You think 7? I didn't count him. Okay, who in here is hiring? Who wants to hire a Rails developer? Okay, me. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so it's a perfect match. So during the break, all 14 of us will come right over here or maybe over here, and we will talk, and we will all have jobs and we'll all hire people in the next, say, 10 minutes. All right? So let's take about 10 minutes, get some pizza if you haven't already. It looks like all the drinks are gone. And then we'll come back and we'll do this again. Everyone has a job.
I try and get it, and I try to get it when they release it every time.
There's this dude who it's written and it's a bot where he just sits on a dude's website and then refreshes it and finds that they're there. It looks like a copy. It like puts it apart and delivers it. It's insane. Just don't get
What's up, dude?
I have an extra that's broken for all of those sort of like
I was like, we have fewer Muslims than Yeah, their team is pretty nice. Nobody really knows
I care about you guys so much, I actually gave you 12 minutes instead of 10. I told you 10, I gave you 12 minutes. Alright, so this is the herding the cats. Herding the cats. Herding the cats. So, remember who you're talking to right now, and when you get to BD Riley's, you can pick up right where you left off.
Can't see my notes in there, can I?
You can do that. You can turn off the mirroring if you want to do that. Also, there's a screen right there, and I didn't notice it for the longest time. It's super helpful.
I'll figure it out.
Alright. Alright, we're herding the cats. Herding the cats.
I'm Brandon.
I promise you I love what I was talking about.
Are you gonna talk real quick?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like mine.
Sure.
Alright.
I should have my profile with you guys. I'm supposed to meet with you. Okay.
Yeah.
You're Laura. Okay.
I know, I've been like.
When this is done, we're all gonna go to BD Riley's and you can
I'm
pick up
busy.
right where you left off.
No big deal.
Promise. Promise. But if we don't start back up, then it never finishes, and then what are you gonna do? So, so we've got some more talks to give. I'm just gonna go through the list in the same order because that seems to be working. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey guys, I'm Laura. I'm with a company called Hired. Have you guys heard of us? Who here knows of Hired? You guys are making my job easy for me. So we are essentially a marketplace, and our goal is to kind of change the way people find jobs right now. So instead of it having it be more of a company-focused experience, it's now a candidate-focused experience. So companies come to you, they'll bid on you, and you get to work with me. I'm your own personal kind of job searching coach, and I'll help you out with whatever you need here in the Austin market. So if you've got any questions, you can come find me at happy hour and enjoy your beer.
So Brandon is going to tell us about Go.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good, how you doing, Brandon?
Hey. Thanks for that, by the way. Yep. So I'm Brandon Harris. I work at a company called TicketBud. We're actually doing the ticket sales for the Web Developer Happy Hour, so go get them or solve the puzzle. Every ticket that you buy, I make $1. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Go, and it's not because I'm hating on Rails or hating on Ruby. It's because things are changing, and Rails is kind of boring, to be honest. It's getting stable. It's getting placid. I don't know, flaccid. Anyway, so let's dive in with an awesome quote. The world is changing very fast. Big will not beat small anymore. It will be the fast beating the slow. And I apologize that this was Rupert Murdoch, so. But it seemed to fit well, right? Okay, so why would you pick Go? Well, first, it's really fast. If you think about what's happening behind the scenes, Ruby runs through an interpreter, and there's a whole bunch of C code that's doing things, and then it has to pick that up and do other things and create memory and have this runtime, blah, blah, blah. Go is a compiled language, and it's just going to run exactly what you tell it to run. It's going to be no bigger and no smaller than what you have. That's what makes it fast. The other thing, as computers have evolved and we've got multiprocessors and many servers, concurrency becomes something that we have to think about. Any service that grows beyond your monolithic Rails app is probably going to have some sort of SOA architecture. So concurrency being built in from the get-go is a huge plus. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to do that in Go. By no means is this the correct way to do it because I'm not good at it yet, but you can do it quickly. The syntax is incredibly simple. Go only has 25 keywords, whereas Ruby has way more than that just in reserved keywords. And if you look at the standard library, there's hundreds. So there's a huge learning curve in Ruby to get up to speed with everything you need to do. In Go, you just have to learn a few things, but you kind of take a step back into everything included. I did mention that Go is statically compiled, and some of you may wonder, what does that mean? If you ever wrote anything that is compiled, you know that you have libraries that need to be installed on the system. You have to link to those libraries, and that can be kind of a pain in the ass, especially in deployments. With Go, you specify everything up front, it gets compiled into one executable, and then you can run that just about anywhere. And of course, we're Rubyists. Testing is very important to us, I hope, right? So testing is a first-class citizen inside of Go. The tooling makes it super simple. You just follow a few conventions and you're off to the races. Okay, so why wouldn't you pick Go? It's a static language, and coming from a dynamic world, that can be a little jarring if you haven't experienced static before. You set variables, you tell the compiler what type of variable that is, and as a Rubyist, you're like, what's a type? I make it quack and it quacks, right?
That is a type.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what a type is.
I'll be here all night. It's not pretty. Go is arguably not as pretty as Ruby. That's just a fact. Not every language has to be pretty, and we're not creating art here. We're actually solving problems, so this doesn't bother me as much. There is no object system inside of Go, and this can be another jarring feature if you're very used to dealing with objects. And there's no enumerable method, which I love personally. I think it's what makes Ruby awesome. Okay. Sorry, this is probably difficult to read because I took screenshots. Dark on dark, my editor just doesn't look right. So on the left-hand side, you have the Go code, and this is implementing a simple loop. Okay, you have the old-fashioned, for each thing, up to 100 things, print that thing. And you have something at the top called a package, and you're importing something called format. You have this main function. Why is it named main? So there's kind of some boilerplate you gotta understand in getting a Go program running. But trade-offs are nice. You look at the Ruby side, and there's 3 ways to do this same thing. There's probably more than that. This is the 3 that I could think of in like 5 seconds. So 100 times, 4 I in 1 to 100, 1 dot dot 100 each do. It's all cool stuff. But Go gives you one way to do it. Okay, so let's talk about the speed a little bit here. So that exact code that you just saw, you can quickly run a benchmark on it. On your command line, you can do go test dash bench dot for in this directory, and then loops is the package that I named. The other one was called main. I had to put it inside of another package so it worked, but whatever. So on the left-hand side, it ran, see that big 2 with a bunch of zeros, it ran that particular piece of code 2 billion times, and it benchmarked it at 0.015 seconds to run that loop. It's pretty fast. Compared to the Ruby version, which was 0.093 seconds, roughly 6.5 times faster, if you do the math. And you can actually make that faster. I had to kind of roll it into a function. If you remove the function, it's even like ridiculously quick. Okay, the same thing, oh, I'm sorry, that's awful to read. This is a test file inside of Go, and in order to specify this in your project, you just do foo_test.go. And then if you run go test, it runs everything in your directory that has that test suffix, and any test inside of here that begins with test gets run. So it's built in from the get-go. And this is kind of a contrived example here. All right, so what I just said, you name your file, startup test, put in your project, and then you just type go test, and it runs it in 1 second. How many people have test suites that run in 1 second? Yeah, I didn't think so. No, you don't. You're up next, buddy. I'm gonna. Okay.
There's a buffer in between.
Concurrency. Okay, so I talked a little about concurrency. Go has this really cool way to make anything concurrent. You just say go, and then the thing you want to run. So, inside of your code, in this here, I have an example. It's right at the very bottom, kind of hard to see, inside of main. There's a little for loop, and the top one, this is kind of a web scraper. There's the quickest thing I could think of. I want to scrape some pages, and let's pretend you can go and grab all these URLs from somewhere, and you can go scrape them in some back-end process. So this is contrived, obviously. So I've got Ruby Gems, Austin on Rails, and Taco Bell. Anybody know that reference from this morning? No? Okay. Thank you. So if you're gonna scrape, that's the function that I created. So it takes in the URL, it opens up an HTTP client, and it goes and gets the URL. I'm not doing anything with it. I just want to pull the page in just for this purpose, and it prints that it's done. If you actually run this code, the first line runs here for each URL, and this one runs synchronously. This go scrape URL is run concurrently. So it creates a new thread for that thing, and it runs outside of your current loop. You can set up a channel, you can consume that, and you can deal with those events later. So this is built right in. So here's some results. And it takes a little bit of understanding what's going on here. So the first thing, it tried to go to Ruby Gems, and it finished Ruby Gems. Then it went to, and there's no concurrency, so it's running the first thing. The next one went to Austin on Rails. It's not concurrent. All of a sudden, here's this concurrent Ruby Gems being thrown in the middle. So it's happening behind the scenes. So before we got to the last URL of Taco Bell, the Go version the concurrent version actually completed, or started and then completed. Then you can kind of see this pattern. So if you do this, you want to do like 100 of these all at once, you can make your code execute extremely fast. You don't have to worry about threading problems you have on Ruby. This is all built right into the language. Okay, so deployment. Maybe this isn't a problem. I think it is. So deploying Ruby stuff kind of sucks. You have, you've got all these files that have to be in place. You got to do something with the old stuff. You got to keep it versioned. Doing a git pull in production, not a good idea. So there's a lot of work to be done. Here, you have a statically compiled binary. So once you have everything built, it's simply running go build, and then neatly place that binary in the path on the server that's running. That's it. I mean, that is literally it. You can put some process in here, but that's like 2 steps, guys. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Go. That would be a really hard thing to look up on Google.
You gotta type go lang for everything.
But luckily, that's a Google thing, right? So they can just do it at the top, right? Are you gonna plug in?
Yeah, is that cool?
Man, that's fine with me. Doing it old school. Hope it works. If the previous guy would disconnect, that would also help.
Go on.
Be careful what you're looking at, because we're all seeing it, man.
Yeah, I don't see. Where's my icon?
I don't know.
Here, we'll do it this way.
I don't know. There you go. That might do it. Nope. We're stuck with you. So.
There we go.
HDMI, how does it work? Have you ever done it?
No, there's
You guys can't see the beat.
something you have to flip over
I
there.
have to flip a switch? Okay, this goes here. There's gotta be some AV nerd here, right?
Okay.
Where's Mike when I need him?
Oh yeah. All
It
right.
worked? Look at that.
Fantastic.
I didn't do anything. You just waved your hand and it started working? That's amazing.
Make sure I got everything queued up. All right. Looking good. Thank you, Sue.
Awesome. Welcome.
Hi, y'all. Good to see you. Cool. So my name's Matt Buck. I'm the co-founder and engineer at a company called Voxable here in Austin. And I want to talk to you all about how you can give your app a voice. That's what we specialize in at Voxable, giving voice to your product. And what we're talking about there is actually giving a voice interface to your product. This is something that a lot of people haven't considered, but recent advances in the industry have made this something that's more delightful than frustrating. The scales used to be tipped a little bit in the opposite direction, but no longer the case any longer. So if you want to get in touch, you should do that here, and we would love to talk to you about how we could either add a voice interface to your existing web application, maybe create a companion Echo or Amazon Echo skill. So why should you think about adding voice? Well, it gives you a chance to use some of the new web APIs. So a lot of folks may not be aware, but there are web speech APIs. These are enabled by default in Chrome. They're behind a flag in Firefox. And there are actually APIs for both speech recognition and synthesis. And adding a voice interface really gives you the opportunity to delight your users. If you think about it, every time you sit down to use an application, it starts with an intent that you have in your head, right? I want to do this thing. And then you kind of fish around in the interface and you see if you can figure out how to do that thing by clicking around, or you could just allow your users to kind of say what they want to do and get a response. And it really gives you the opportunity, I mean, as an engineer, nothing I have done has made me feel more like a wizard than working with voice interfaces. I can walk into my living room and say that I want the TV to turn on. So I just speak my will into the air, and then I have it become manifest before my eyes. That's magic, y'all. That's what magicians do. And it's going to give you a chance to be a part of the future. I really feel like this is the next major paradigm shift in technology. Ubiquitous voice interfaces are just going to become more and more part of our lives, and now is the time to get on board. Okay, so let's show you what I'm talking about. So I decided to pretend that Spree Commerce, which is an open source e-commerce application, had hired me to add a voice interface to their product. Let me embiggen this somewhat. There we go, that's visible. So I decided, in looking around here, we've got this list of orders that have come through on my e-commerce application. And let's say, let me reload this real quick. Cool. So let's say that I wanted to, I can see one thing, we've got orders in various states. Maybe I want to filter by the type of order. Show me completed orders. Cool. So I had an intent in my head. I wanted to only see the completed orders. I clicked this handy little button down here. I said what I wanted, and I got an answer. So I could have, seen, oh, well, there's a filter, and okay, status, and I can kind of, type in there if I'd like or select one. Or I can just say what I want. Now, users, of course, are finicky. They're going to phrase things in lots of different ways. So what if I said something like, filter by canceled orders? Cool. So I phrased it in a slightly different way, but it still understood what I was talking about. So let me show you how we're pulling this off. So first of all, I'm using a library called SpeechKit. Yeah, congrats if you understand the reference there. So SpeechKit is what gives me this this handy little interface down here for enabling the web speech API. You can see it also gives me some some nice help text if I would like it. But then the real magic comes from this platform called API.ai. So this is a natural language understanding platform. It also does speech recognition, but as I mentioned, since you can use the speech recognition web API, that's probably going to give you a better experience since you're actually doing that client side. So the first thing you need to do when you're understanding speech is you need to try to define the intent of the user. What is it they're trying to do? So let's say they're trying to filter by status. So right here in the interface, no code required. I'm just specifying a few different ways that a user might phrase that. Show me the status orders, show me filter by, and then the entities are what's actually going to be pulled out of that speech. So I can say, I've got a couple of states defined here, canceled, and then I can also specify some synonyms. And they might say stopped. For complete, they might say completed or finished. And so doing that actually allows me to handle a wide variety of speech. And you can see I've also got this filter orders by date. So this is where things get even cooler. So using API.ai, I can kind of use this built-in entity, which is just going to allow me to kind of pull a date out of the phrase that I speak and hand that back to me in an actual date-time object. So let's see what that looks like. Go back to the full list of orders. Show me orders created before last Friday. can see there it's filtered it down to only 2 orders, and just to prove that this is in-camera trickery, show me orders created before last Wednesday. Awesome. All right, so once again, I could have gone in here, gone through the filter. Oh, there's a key. Oh, everybody loves dealing with these, right? Okay, I'll think on that. So yeah, I mean, maybe I just saved my user 7 clicks. What's 7 clicks? Well, if that's something that I do 1,000 times over the course of a year, that's 7,000 clicks, right? We're engineers. We have to think in the aggregate. So, let me head back. The code for this is actually up on GitHub right now. You can check it out, github.com/Voxable Labs. If you own the organization on GitHub named Voxable, we should chat, because I would like that. And get in touch. You can check us out, howdy@voxable.io. Thanks a lot, y'all.
That was magic. Oh my god. Okay, so next up we have Nathan Ladd, and what I'm really curious about.
Yes, sir. How does it work? Like, oh, you can.
There's an adapter laying on the floor there. If you need that. So what I'm really curious about is the title of your talk, because originally you said it was linearization basics, modeling state in an ordered sequence of transitions, but then it appears that someone changed the title of your talk to tips to save your bacon. So I can't wait to find out which one it is.
Well, yes. It's not the one that sounded smart. Spoiler alert. Okay, cool. So I'm really glad I went after Matt Buck. Okay, computer, write my talk for me. Computer, write my talk for me. Hey Matt, I think there's a bug. I think it's not working. No, so I realized I actually started sketching out the talk for describing linearization, and there's a whole movement around immutable persistent stores and all that stuff. It's really great. Also, it does not condense well into 5 to 7 minutes. So I thought, what can I do for people in 5 to 7 minutes that would be useful? And I can do what I do best, which is talk about things that are wrong. But I'm not going to talk about things that you're doing wrong. I'm going to talk about things that I've done wrong, and then maybe you can not do those things because actually they're terrible. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. So the first, I'll just give you 5 tips. The first tip I can give you is when you're using Rails, ignore Rails environments. Do not use them. Do not write code that asks what Rails environment it is. Do not specialize those config like environments development.rb to add a whole bunch of custom stuff. And don't put a bunch of logic and spec/support and all that stuff that allows your environments to diverge. I've seen Rails applications over the years where you look at the actual application being run when the test suite runs, and it's like a distant cousin of the application that runs in production because it's diverged so much. So don't do that because I've done it. It's terrible. Another thing, don't modify Rails or any of the files that Rails generates. Don't monkey patch active record. You're going to support that for the rest of your life. Another thing to note is don't monkey patch active record. You're going to have to support that for the rest of your life. Don't modify any of the files like config application.rb that Rails auto-generates. Don't do it. Don't. I know what you're thinking. Well, maybe it's okay in this one case. I'm a pragmatic programmer. I'm going to do this when it makes sense. No, it actually doesn't make sense. Don't ever do it. So if you've ever upgraded Rails across a major point release, you'll know all of those files that Rails generates completely change every so often. And so what you really want to be able to do is regenerate all of your application.rb, your boot.rb, your environment.rb. You want to be able to regenerate them from a brand new Rails every time you upgrade. One thing I want to note is sometimes you may be really tempted to monkey patch active record because you've seen a Stack Overflow post that was upvoted a lot that has a little 3 line, maybe a little 5 lines that really does exactly the thing that you want. Don't do it. Don't. I know you're going to do it anyway, but I just want to warn you now, right? Don't lean on integration or acceptance tests too much. They're good. I mean, end-to-end tests in general, they can spot problems pretty well. but they hearken you back, they bring you back to where you were at when you started programming without tests at all, which is to say you've got a browser, you're hitting the F5 button or Apple R to refresh it, and you have the entire universe available to you, and you're just trying to make the feature work. That entire context that's loaded every time your browser loads the page is also available when you write those big old elaborate integration tests, and they have the same outcome. You write a bunch of highly coupled code that is completely unmaintainable and incomprehensible. So use them to help as a countermeasure when you find that you have regressions or defects here and there to help you help with coverage, but don't rely on them very much. I wrote capybara tests for years and thought it was like the awesomest way to write code, and in the end I just left a bunch of people at people admin with some terrible code that they have to maintain. So don't do that. Don't. Yeah, I'm just telling you, don't do it. It's a really, but you know what I really learned? I learned a lot about myself, and so that's really what's important, right? Okay, another thing, don't procrastinate building a reporting database. Like, I know you think it's going to be a lot of work up front. Oh, we're going to have to build a reporting database. But like, eventually you're going to need those reports. And what's going to happen is if you don't build the reporting database up front when you really need them, you're just going to bang out some SQL on top of your transactional database. And like, everything that happens after that moment will be awful. Like, nothing will be good. What's going to happen is you're going to find yourself 9 months later, you're going to look at database columns that only exist to pre-compute values that are needed for that one report. And then you're going to find that other code is since coupled to that one computed value because it was convenient at the time. And then you're going to have a giant amalgamation of database columns that are all updated at different times for different reasons, for different purposes, written by different programmers, and none of it makes a damn bit of sense. So don't ever do that. Just write a reporting database, put your denormalized data there, and let your transactional database stay in third normal form. And so, and doing this will pay for itself in approximately, what did I say here in this smarmy little slide? Yeah, 4.5 minutes. That's about how long it takes to pay for itself. So that's when you should think about doing it. Another thing that I want to say is don't start taking your database and just adding onto it by throwing other databases into production willy-nilly. That's a terrible idea. Excuse me. So sometimes you're like, hey, it really takes a long time for this code to run because it's locking the entire database for like, hundreds of milliseconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the data in Redis instead. And then, oh, look, everything's really fast. That is a really terrible idea. What you have now is a really poorly performing distributed system. And distributed systems have this really nice property that they really appear to work even when you've not modeled them correctly whatsoever. So you typically, that ACID compliant database that's running underneath your application, like let it do its thing, or use something else, but don't have like an ACID compliant database and then have a bunch of Redis values here and there that are pre-computing stuff that you throw all over the place. And after commit hooks are really the same thing. And actually a variation on after commit is the rescue or sidekick job that runs after something else happens that goes and monkeys with the database behind the scenes. That is called eventual consistency. Eventual consistency is really great for having a cold database that you stand up to put some data on a web page for people to look at their last orders in the last 24 hours and things like that. Eventually consistent data is really terrible for building a robust application on top of, because latency comes into play, and then whenever you come into adverse conditions, latency, load, things like that, everything breaks down. So I would just recommend don't do that, because I've done it and it's really terrible. So those are 5 things that I've stopped doing because I realized they were awful. So if you want to keep doing them, you're welcome to. Yeah, Brandon.
What should we do?
Well,
threw the whole stack away, basically.
We'll talk about that later.
So Brandon, I've got a consulting agency that I've just spun up, and we're really excited to just engage with you. So we want to talk after.
There was a sales hook.
Yeah. All right, that's it.
All right, next up, my good friend Matt Swain.
If you need a mini display port, There's one right here.
I'm gonna try the magic technology first.
Okay, now working.
If you want to, it's your time.
Let's see, look at that.
Oh my god. Wait, can I like full screen this too? Oh god, where's my mouse pointer?
Yeah, I hate that part.
Do that.
Yes. No. Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go. It's all good.
All right.
All right, you got 5 minutes. You got 3 minutes.
What?
2.5.
Oh my god. Alright. Hey, I'm Matthew Swain. I'm here to talk about Docker. I think you guys have had a Docker talk before. I mean, everybody talks about it all the time.
Slow down a little bit.
It's like amazing. No, Tony said I had 3 minutes, so I'm gonna be as fast as I can go. Anyway, so why should you listen to me about Docker? Well, okay, so I work at Spreadfast. I do development operations there, and we have 25 production services running across 40 different Docker containers on 10 servers in Amazon ECS. So we have lots of production Docker in our infrastructure, and we have an end-to-end development process that does continuous integration and deploys, and it's really lovely. And we like parallelize all of our Rails tests using Docker, and you didn't have to change any code to do that. And you could say that Docker in our organization has been a great success. But you'd be lying if you said that. So allow me to just step back a little bit and talk about what Docker is for those who are not really familiar with it. So I think the most accurate way to describe Docker is to say that it is a company that has a fantastic marketing team, and they design really cute logos, and they generate a whole lot of hype around technologies that have been around for decades. A less cynical way of saying that is that it's a lot of automation around a lot of different tools, and the core idea behind those tools are process isolation. So the foundation of it is all based on LXC, Linux containers. And you can really just think about Linux containers as folders that your app runs in with all of their dependencies that they can't escape out of. And then Docker also bundles with that the idea of copy on write file systems, which is a way to snapshot and clone those folders and duplicate them like many times. And it also gives you a little private network that is like the LAN in your house that you get from the cable company. Like, it's this private little network that only exists in that folder. And then it bundles all these things together and gives you a bunch of tools that you can like take these and like share it with other people. And it's actually really neat. Like, it makes it really easy to do things like the parallelization test example I was talking about earlier. In our infrastructure, we basically put Ruby, Rails, gems, the database all into a Docker container. Just copy it 10 times, run 1/10 of our test suite on each duplicate, and boom, our tests go down from 2 hours to 15 minutes. Great. The other cool thing that it gives us is platform dependencies are bundled with our code now. So if we have 2 different Rubies on 2 different branches, that's not a problem. We don't even have to run RVM prod, which you should never do because it's a real bad security problem. If you want a whole different OS than the one that's running in your cloud provider for some reason, you can actually do that by taking your whole OS and putting it in that folder that you can copy. If you want to email your whole production stack to your grandpa so you can run your app, like you can do that too. It makes it really easy to do that. And the third reason it's neat is that all these big players are giving you infrastructure that you can use to run Docker containers on their environments. Amazon has one, Google has one. There seems to be more and more coming up every day, and it works, really well for us. But this actually is not so much of a talk about why you should use Docker as a talk about why you probably shouldn't. So there's a lot of things, a lot of ideas that people have because of the hype machine that is the Docker Corporation that are going around, and I just don't agree with a lot of them. So for one, Docker is not a virtual machine. It is a folder stuff. It is like chroot, chroot on steroids. If you guys Google chroot, you'll see that it's a really old school Linux tool that lets you essentially do the same thing as Docker. Run a container, run an application in a folder that's completely isolated from everything else on the system. The other thing I hear a lot is that Docker is a way to make production and dev exactly the same. That is absolutely not true. Production concerns are always a little bit different than dev concerns, and you're going to have a bad time if you think that you can just take your Docker container in dev and run it in prod. That kind of plays into this third bullet point, because essentially Docker doesn't absolve you of any of these operational concerns like performance, security, availability. And then one of the most important things is Docker is not stable. It's under very heavy development, and that's a really good thing because it has a good active community. But when you run into problems, you're gonna have to understand all these technologies that it's built on top of to get yourself out of a bad situation. You're gonna have to like know how LXC works. You're gonna have to know how copy and write file systems work. You're gonna have to know like what TTYs and PTYs are and the difference between the two, and signal handling and like the L word, Linux, right? You're gonna have to know Linux to get this right. Some other more esoteric myths that I always hear like floating around the like hype machine. One process per container, that's crap. Why would you throw away like 30 years of scheduling and memory optimization in Unix? This is even in the Docker documentations. Like, don't listen to that. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, fork, run multiple processes in a container. You're gonna be better off that way. Other things I've heard is like you never have to have an init process. Congrats, now your containers may never die gracefully, and if you want to know why, you can come talk to me after the talk. Another myth is you always have to have an init process, and congrats, now your containers are like super complicated. I heard that BTRFS is fast. It is not. It's the slowest thing I've ever used in my life. And ZFS is not stable on Linux. It is on FreeBSD, but it's not on Linux. It's just terrible. And the last one was a troll. So. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, Docker is cool. It works really well for a lot of our problems. It fills in a much needed void in Linux compared to some of the other operating systems like Solaris that have had these things for a long time. And you can do really cool, interesting things with it. But I think that Docker in production requires as much, if not more, operational expertise than any other solution that you can really think of. So anyway, if you have any questions, come find me afterwards. Check out this cool stock photo that came with the slide program. It's amazing. Like, it's really creepy. Anyway, anyway, thanks.
If he said it, it's true. I believe every word of it. So, Scott Hamilton. You're Scott. And you're going to tell us about, oh my God, breaking the monolith. But DHH says monoliths are great.
The monolith cannot be broken by any crap.
That's right. That's exactly right. You will not break my monolith. Actually, we're breaking our monolith. Okay, so no pressure, but we have 2 more talks and we have 6 minutes. If we go a little bit over, it'll probably be okay.
I would do this?
Only once has there been a riot. No, that's not it. It's called co-working. Oh no. Can you plug in? Let's plug in.
Good.
Whichever side it's on. There, it's right there. It's almost like I have the same computer. All right. I see it there.
Good.
Now I see it here.
All right.
And you might, if you want mirroring, you can do that.
Yeah, I do.
Whatever you like, because it's impossible to look at this.
Yeah.
I think so. There you go. Mirrors. Beautiful. All right.
Sweet.
And your time is up. So thank you. Sorry.
So we kind of hard set on 9 o'clock hitting the bar. Is that?
No, it'll be fine. Some people in here have to get to the bar by 9 o'clock. But if you go over 30 seconds,
I think
I'll be that guy.
Keith's already there.
Yeah, some people are already there.
No, seriously, I'm really checking out here soon. So let's get on this.
All right. So yeah, my talk's on breaking the monolith. Truth is, I actually didn't want to do this talk, but my coworker Luke back there, yeah, he's kind of relentless. If you ever work with him, he really won't stop until you just relent. So I decided to fine, I'll just do this. It's like 10 minutes or what, 5 minutes? Actually, probably less than that right now, right? Okay. Let's see here. Where's my cursor? There we go. All right. So my name's Scott Hamilton. I work at CSD, Communication Services for the Deaf. We're a fun little company here in town now. We have a small dev team, 100% remote, but we are not hiring, so that's not an issue. But just want to say we're a good group. So speaking of the monolith, I am not hating on the monolith. You know, it's great. It works many ways. It just, in this particular case, I had no idea how to break the monolith. Or actually, I had some ideas. There was all these various presentations and talks, and but nothing that really quite spoke to me. So the reason I kind of went down this path was that we were starting a new project, kind of based on our existing production project, and looking at that experience of long test runs, everything's really tightly coupled, and you know, getting on the hype bandwagon, I thought, well, let's see, how would I approach potentially breaking this project up? And like, what would I need to do? So it came down to AMQP versus HTTP. So, you know, obviously we all, you know about HTTP, but I didn't really know a whole lot about AMQP. So obviously HTTP is pretty awesome. So that was pretty easy. I knew where that was really nice to use and a really successful, useful protocol, but really wasn't too sure about how it would go with the services. So I looked at AMQP, Advanced Message Queuing Protocol, and it was really more, as I read more and more about it, it became more and more obvious how it was, you know, well suited for our task. There's so many different brokers out there. There's RabbitMQ, ZeroMQ, whatever MQ, lot to choose from. And of course, all the readings was saying, hey, there's just less overhead versus HTTP, and it's, you know, pretty darn versatile. So all that, you know, led me to find AMQP, pretty darn money. And then so we looked at, in particular, RabbitMQ, just because really well suited, really popular, admin interface. So many different languages have drivers for it. Very configurable, because you can do synchronous request response, asynchronous workers, kind of the whole gamut. So, you know, stepping back again, I looked at all these items as a whole, and I thought, well, what do we really need to do to get started? So it was more of like, okay, well, we really need RPC functionality in these services. Like, that's the bread and butter of things. Something sending a request, waiting, and getting a response. HTTP does this very well. Not hating on HTTP, but I wanted to compare the two, to be fair. So, you know, another issue is like RabbitMQ and AMQP are very open-ended on how to do RPC. There's pretty much no set way. So I started to look at the gem. So I started to look at the gem landscape, because there's a gem for everything, right? So Bunny is kind of the foundation, extremely popular for MRI Ruby. It's what you use to get all the low-level access, producers, consumers, exchanges, all that cool stuff. But it's open-ended with RPC. So again, it's kind of like, figure it out. Then I found this project called Hutch. And I was like, oh, Hutch is pretty sweet. If you check, it's well maintained, it's well structured. But it only does asynchronous calls and messaging. They have various other projects, but Hutch in particular, about that. In fact, well, I'll talk about that later. But then there's like all these other gems I found, like all these like RailsConf talks, like Rack Rabbit, come, you know, use this project, and then you go to look at it, and it's like hasn't been touched in a year or two, that sort of thing. So I was kind of bummed about that. And there's actually quite a few gems that approach this problem for some reason, and then, I don't know, just go nowhere. But I did open up an issue with Hutch, and they just said, you should probably just use Bunny. It's like, well, okay. Carrot. Just play on that. So it's pretty simple. Thanks. So I created a gem called Carrot RPC. At least it started as pretty simple. It may not be so much right now, but I still think it's kind of simple. There's various concepts of just client and server. It's pretty simple, kind of what you're kind of expecting in RPC, versus the async verbiage they use, producer consumer kind of terminology. But in this case, it's just client server. It also has a really simple CLI for the servers, running servers. It's extendable, and we actually, Luke in particular, did a lot of work on including JSON API support for the RPC servers. And there's a URL at the bottom on GitHub. And pretty quickly here, so this is kind of I guess it's kind of small. But that's a workflow of generally how it works. You can use it in your controller if you want. It's how we're largely using it. In a controller, the client connects to RabbitMQ via name queue. Message goes from the client to RabbitMQ, sits in this name queue. Meanwhile, the server is running off on its own process, and it checks that queue, and it sends a response back via temporary queue, and it gets picked off. And we're using JSON RPC as the protocol for just the message passing. But you can use whatever payload you want. In our case, we're using JSON API, which it's all kind of confusing if you don't really look at all that stuff. But very quickly, very end, I have a little sample app, just how to get started with it, and some benchmarks on there, because until I actually looked at some numbers, I didn't really quite believe AMQP was better. So I did a quick comparison, and I also included those. So real quick, I'm not going to run the demo because it's pretty boring, but the numbers are kind of interesting. Let's see here. That's better, right? Can anyone read that? No? One more. So this is the rate task. This is just for one iteration. What is that? 1,000th of a second for AMQP. HTTP, quite a bit slower. Still fast. Still very fast. Under a second, 1/10 of a second.
What HTTP client did you use?
I used REST client.
Okay.
And then there's used Puma on the server end. Yeah. So these apps have basically one's doing the request and response, and just in between one's doing AMQP and HTTP. And if anyone has any suggestion on how I need to improve this benchmarking, please tell me. But then I went to 100, and they're like, okay, well, AMQP, cranking it out, so under a second. HTTP, over a second. And then I did 1,000, a little over a second for AMQP, and HTTP took quite a bit longer. And really the only difference between HTTP and HTTP threaded is that this is also on MRI, so take it for what you will. But they're also using the same Ruby implementation. So but HTTP threaded was just creating a thread for each request on the client end. So firing it off. That's it.
We have one more. Do we have one more? We do? Awesome.
Just to make things easy.
So by my logic, you have -6 minutes.
I will.
So talk a little faster than he did.
I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
Should I talk backwards?
Backwards might help. I think everyone will be fine. Okay. There we go. All right. So to my knowledge, Meteorology has never run out of booze, so I think we'll all be fine.
That is not true.
Not true? We're gonna.
And they run out of my booze.
Okay, I understand. All right.
So, what is Rack? According to the Rack website, Rack provides a minimal interface between app servers that support Ruby, that's these, and Ruby frameworks, that's the ones on top. A production setup would also have one of these, a web server, to serve up static assets and queue requests. So a request comes in here, gets forwarded to the app server, and goes through Rack to get a response from the app. It's probably more helpful to think of Rack as a protocol or a common language than an actual app. And as complex as this looks, in most cases, you would only have one piece from each of these tiers, sometimes not even that. So for example, maybe you have a dev environment running your Hanami app on WebRay. Or the old standby, a production Rails app running on Passenger behind Apache. But today, very quickly, we're going to build a custom plain old Ruby app and run it on Thin. So what does a Rack app look like? It takes an HTTP request, and it returns a response. So I don't know if you can see that. This is an example Rack app from the Rack website. There's a run command. It takes an argument that responds to call. In this case, it's a proc. That argument returns a status code, response headers, and a response body that responds to each. So this isn't a very interesting or useful example. So let's build something more interesting. There's a website that maybe some of you have seen, isitchristmas.com. It has one job. It tells you whether or not it's Christmas. Now, I usually know whether it's Christmas. Not always. Depends on how many drinks I've had. But sometimes I run across like a clickbait headline, and my response is something like this. So we're going to build an Is It Christmas clone for April Fool's Day. Let's start with a template. This is an ERB file. We have a ternary operator and one instance variable that puts yes or no into a H1 tag. It looks a lot like a Rails V. That's it for the template. In Rails terms, this is what you might call a controller. You'll notice we've defined call. We return an array with status code, headers, and a body. Our body is an array, and in that array we render our ERB template, which we've loaded down there. Oops. Last, we need a file called config.ru. When we'll run the command rackup, which reads config.ru and launches a server. And in our case, that's going to be Thin, and the default port is 9292. So that'll look something like this. And it probably looks pretty familiar if you've ever started up a Rails server, which I think probably everyone has here. So as promised, we've built a custom Ruby framework that uses Rack to run on the Thin server. So really quickly, we'll compare what we made to the example app from earlier. We have the run command. We have the one argument that responds to call, HTTP status code, headers, and a body that responds to each. So Rails is also a Rack compliant framework. It has a config.ru as well. And on the bottom is what you would find inside. Very similar to ours up top. In fact, you can run rackup to run a Rails app, but it'll be missing some of the logging and stuff. So in addition to being a Rack app, Rails also uses something called Rack middleware. And these are basically teeny tiny Rack apps, not unlike the one we just built, that can be delegated to fulfill part of that request. So takeaways. Rack is a very simple interface. It responds to call, returns status, errors, and body. Rails uses Rack, both as a framework and in the form of middleware. And more generally, taking things apart and building alternatives is a great way to learn about how they work. And finally, it's not April Fool's Day or Christmas. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of further reading. I'll try to have the slides up. Thank you for listening. Again, my name's Alexander.
Awesome. So there you go. 12 talks. We're only 13 minutes over. That was unbelievable. We'll never do that again. And now we're going to, first of all, thank Capital Factory for hosting us. Thank Hired for providing pizza and drinks. Thank all of you for coming. Don't forget to sign up for the South by Southwest Happy Hour. Ticket Bud. Brandon can tell you the secret code. And yeah, so now we're going to adjourn to BD Raleigh for a little socialization practice. And see you guys there. Join Slack. Join Slack.
You're not telling me what to do.
You're already on the Slack.
That is correct.
You did what I told you before I even told you. Fully recovered? Oh shit, that's why we're